My name is Kathleen Barrows, and I'm a senior at UPS, double majoring in natural science biology and environmental policy and decision making. I would like to start off this video with a land acknowledgement. This project was completed on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people are the original stewards of these lands, and despite the forced removal of their people, they continue to care for the land today. I commit to continuously working to uplift the voices of the Puyallup people and the other indigenous people of the Coast Salish land and beyond. I am here today to talk to you about my Environmental 210 policy project, which is about President Biden's executive order tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, released in January 2021. I will be focusing on Section 216, which outlines the processes of implementing the 30 by 30 initiative, and will ultimately try to talk about how this executive order applies to Washington state waters. 30 by 30 is an initiative that has gathered a lot of support from scientists, conservationists, NGOs, and global organizations such as the UN. Its goal is to conserve and protect 30% of national land and waters by 2030. The United Nations Convention on Biodiversity formally called for governments around the world to adopt the initiative back in January 2020. They define this initiative as protecting sites of particular importance for biodiversity through protected areas and other effective area-based management measures by 2030, covering at least 60% of such sites and at least 30% of land and sea areas, with at least 10% under strict protection. That begs the question, how do they define sites of particular importance? What do they mean by protected areas or other effective area-based management? How is effectiveness measured? These are just some of the questions that have been raised in response to the executive order, and while I won't be answering any of these questions today, they are good to keep in the back of your mind as we carry on. Originally, I had wanted to connect with various stakeholders from different groups: the fishing industry, Washington indigenous tribes such as the Puyallup tribe, and people from local NGOs or environmental advocacy organizations in order to obtain views on this issue from most perspectives and compare them to generate a list of implementation guidelines. Ultimately, I was only able to connect with two people from the fishing industry. So this project only conveys one outside perspective, but the two people I talked to include Chris Barrows, who is the president of Pacific Seafood Processing Association. He represents seafood processors in Alaska that include companies such as Trident, Peter Pan, and Alaska Seafoods. I also talked to Lori Steele, who is the executive director of the West Coast Seafood Processors Association. She represents seafood processors in California, Oregon, and Washington state, including the Pacific Seafood Group, Ocean Gold Seafoods, and Bornstein Seafoods, to name a few. So, what potential effects does Section 216 have on the fisheries industry? To answer that, I talked with Lori Steele about a similar bill, AB 3030, that appeared in the California State Legislature back in 2019, but ultimately died in November 2020. I will be using this state bill to talk about issues that Lori pointed to regarding the 30 by 30 initiative at the state level. That will then set up the opportunity to compare and theorize issues that could be applied to Washington state. AB 3030 was a California state-specific bill that outlined goals to protect at least 30% of the state's land areas and waters, to help advance the protection of 30% of the nation's oceans, and to support regional, national, and international efforts to protect at least 30% of the world's land areas and waters, and 30% of the world's oceans. There was huge opposition to this bill coming from the West Coast Seafood Processors Association, their members, and other companies affiliated with them. In a July 2020 letter to the chair of the Natural Resources and Water Committee, Senator Henry Stern, WCSPA, and 17 other organizations expressed concern over the ambiguity of the bill, stating that, as currently written, the bill threatens our livelihoods and our ability to provide and deliver California seafood. The letter states that had the bill specified that it is not the goal nor the intent of the state to implement measures that prevent the sustainably managed fisheries of California from accessing fishing grounds, they would have removed their opposition. The ambiguity, in addition to to the lack of defining the implementation process is something that has also been noted as a concern with the executive order. The January 27th executive order only directs the Secretary of the Interior to submit a report to the task force within 90 days. It is currently past that 90-day mark, and those guidelines have yet to be released. That executive order report is to then propose guidelines for determining whether lands and waters qualify for conservation, and it also shall establish mechanisms to measure progress towards that 30% goal. Well, this leads to questions such as what constitutes the ability to conserve and what does it mean to protect? And by whose definition are we implementing these processes with? Going back to the AB 3030 letter of opposition, there was a comment that points directly to this issue. Pursuant to the Marine Life Protection Act, there has already been established a network of marine protected areas whereby roughly 16% of state waters are protected. This is something similar that Chris Barrows also mentioned in our interview and was mentioned in a letter from PSPA and the At-Sea Processors Association to the acting administrator of NOAA. The North Pacific Management Council has implemented area-based protections covering approximately 65% of waters under its jurisdiction. This ties into the complaint about ambiguity of the bill because what the North Pacific Management Council considers a marine protected area may not be what the Secretary of Interior's report defines marine protected areas as. What if that report qualified marine protected areas for this 30 by 30 initiative only as no-take zones that do not allow any recreational or commercial use within their boundaries? What does this mean for the 65% of Alaskan waters that were under some sort of management practice, or the 16% of Californian waters that were established under the Marine Life Protection Act? Is that entire 16% counted towards the 30%? Not only is it important to gain clarity in what constitutes an MPA. Should commercial or recreational fishing be allowed in MPAs, then there would be recognition of voluntary management and conservation efforts that many in the fishing industry have undergone. From the perspective of the fishing industry, this recognition is pertinent to the success not only of the 30 by 30 initiative, but to the success of the industry as well. These are the types of questions that won't get an easy answer anytime soon, but they are critical questions to be asking nonetheless. So, what insights does AB 3030 have? What will the implementation of the executive order look like? And what does this all mean for the state of Washington? Well, one clear thing to take note of is the fact that AB 3030 ultimately lacked enough definition to ensure that the fishing industry would continue to have some sort of access to protected areas. I think that this really captures what the other issues were about too. What is a marine protected area defined as? What is protecting or conserving defined as? And how will fisheries regulations already in place be affected by this bill? This concept, though, is huge because the fishing industry wants to continue to have fish stocks so they can continue fishing. They want to work to conserve what is left. Fundamentally, they support engaging in more sustainable practices, as ensuring that the fish stock survives mean that their livelihood survives as well. At the same time, though, if the marine protected areas were to be no-take zones, then that completely diminishes all effort that those in and affiliated with the fishing industry have put in to create fishing conservation and management practices that look to solve their very own problem. It's asking a question and then ignoring all of the thought and hard work that went into answering that question. As for what this means for Washington State, I think there is an opportunity to learn from the past and to not make the same mistakes that were made when creating AB 3030. Basically, what I'm saying is I don't think the US government should look a gifted horse in the mouth. Recognize the hard work that many in the fishing industry have put in to create sustainable solutions. Should the marine protected areas be classified as no-take zones, then I really think they skipped out on an opportunity that could have provided so much additional information to better understand new and collaborative ways to fish and conserve at the same time. Additionally, more than 90 days have gone in to generate a report that has collected input from state, local, tribal, and territorial officials agricultural and forest landowners, fishermen, and other key stakeholders. This is a complicated initiative that will not be easy to implement, manage, or monitor. Now, let's shift a bit to talk about the concept of protecting 30% of all water and land worldwide. As the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity proposed all governments to formally adopt. This is not a new concept. There are conversations out there that include ideas such as conservationist E.O. Wilson's Half-Earth Project, where he aims to generate support for protecting 50% of the Earth by 2050. In doing so, the project is advocating for prioritizing the safety of the environment, stating that scientists and conservationists agree that this grand proposal is both necessary and achievable. There are tons of questions that come up when looking into this project as well, many similar to that of the executive order. Questions include which half? Who gets to decide what constitutes a protected area? Who will be the ones put in charge of managing the protected areas? Will people have access to the 50% that is protected? What will the 50% that isn't protected look like? Will there be any animals that reside in the unprotected half, or will they all be consolidated to the half that is protected? Will the protection of 50% of the earth require groups and communities to relocate? Are we willing to sacrifice the lives and livelihoods of people in order to protect half the planet in hopes of protecting upwards of 85% of biodiversity? These questions are difficult, and I don't think any of them will be easily answered anytime soon, but the implications of these actions need to be taken seriously. Not only will this executive order have actions that affect the state of Washington, but the actions of the United States will continue on to influence decisions around the globe, including those related to the Half-Earth Project. Just because an idea sounds good does not mean it is realistic to implement, and that seems to be a rather large problem in the conservation world. That being said, if you're interested in learning more about the 30 by 30 initiative, I would highly recommend heading to the NOAA website and seeing if there are any MPA or 30 by 30 related webinars coming up soon in the events calendar. I've attended a couple webinars that talked about the science behind the 30-30 initiative, and it helps provide me with some place-specific context to better understand the concept of the initiative as a whole. If you're interested in learning more about the fisheries perspective, I suggest heading over to sustainablefisheries-uw.org. They are a website/blog type site that aims to communicate the science, policies, and human dimensions of sustainable fisheries. I have read a couple of really interesting articles that were written by Dr. Ray Hilborn, who specializes in natural resource management and conservation, that touched on topics such as misinformation, bycatch, and has resources for you to scavenge on topics such as overfishing, fisheries management, and seafood consumption. I would also recommend taking my project and expanding upon it. As I've mentioned earlier, there are so many other stakeholder perspectives that are involved in this issue, and I only touched on one of them. So I definitely encourage someone else to take up the reins and continue on this topic if you're so interested. And that wraps up what I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.